My name's Brandon Squirrel. I go by Pyro on most of the shows and the chats, and a lot of people know me. Some people say I know everybody in there, but I've been doing this, looking into the subject of Bigfoot, and for about the last, I don't know, 8 years now or so, since my grandson has, watched the Discovery channels, finding Bigfoot. It got popular and stuff, and he's like, Papa, you hunt all the time, and he said, have you ever, is Bigfoot out there? And I was like, well, the creek, we go to the creek. He's like, no. I was like, yeah. I said, when we were kids, me and your aunt Donnie and my cousin, we were down riding bikes, just down from the house, out on a summer day. They were out cutting, had just cut the hay in the fields, and it smelled real pretty down in there. So we were down and just staying cool around the water and riding through the woods, and come up on the field and we're sitting there watching it in the evening time, and the dew was coming in, the fog, and just taking in the scenery of a giant field, and something hollered right behind us, 40 yards, I guess now. That was so powerful and loud, it made our sight go fuzzy green. The leaves are just like they are right now, but it changed our, the vibration of it changed, made it feel like you were getting electrocuted. I've been shocked several times, being a fireman and stuff now, and before that mostly, I was a little smarter at the time as a fireman, thankfully, but where it just vibrates you so hard, it's like somebody grabs you and is shaking you like a rag doll, and that's what this sound did to us. But I can't remember it ending. I mean, I could still hear it in my head. It was so powerful and loud. It sounded like a man starting up, or like a storm siren, or a tornado siren, just but it went into a holler, a loud holler, and then into a roar, and kept that up for, I don't know, 10 seconds at least, maybe 20 seconds. But I remember we were just shaking that whole time, and then the second it quit, it's like it released us. So we just, our bikes were pointed back down the trail, and riding back to the house, the half a mile, running inside. And I remember running, just slamming the bike down and hitting the wall, on the porch, and just everybody piling inside, and we didn't know what it was, what to do, and Dad said, he saw us freaked out, and he said, okay, so what happened, where was it, and so we'll need to do, get medicine to take care of this, because we're taught, from a young age, that there's no separation in the spiritual world and the physical world. So it's all right there together. And I always think if more people were raised up like that, if we'd already found Bigfoot, if you just believed it was part of the world. People have that. That's a big jump for them to accept. And ghosts. A lot of people see ghosts, but don't believe in Bigfoot. And don't believe they can do some of the stuff they can. But since then, before that even, knowing about the spiritual part of it, my grandma, we used to have she lived just down the road as well, and we used to have big potluck dinners every evening. The whole family, the circle here, in northeast Oklahoma, Kennewood area, lived the whole family, immediate family lived within, I don't know, 15 houses in this circle. And my grandpa Willie, he built most of them, and helped show them how to build their houses and stuff. So it's a very independent, community, and family here. But we were having dinner one night in the summertime as well. I remember it was a full moon, and from our house you can see down, maybe 100 yards down the dirt road from there. And here come this person coming walking through, and we thought, who's that? Everybody's here, that's the whole family's already here. And there was 20, 25, 30 people there eating. in the evenings, and here comes somebody else. It's like, okay, as it kept coming, it kept getting bigger and bigger and bigger, and we noticed it was dark. Every time we'd walk through the moonlight in the trees, it would stay dark, and it was like, huh. And then, I wasn't but 5 or 6 years old at the time. But then, they brought it to Grandma's attention, and then all the girls, all my aunts ran inside. They were scared. They'd come running and piled in her little bitty house, And Grandma went out there, I remember, with her cane. She was already, bent over at the time, from the scoliosis, but walked out there and started, griping at it in Cherokee, to leave, to leave us alone, because, we believed it was a spirit, a bad spirit then. But I remember seeing how tall it was, walking by a mailbox there that was on an embankment already that was 1 foot high. Then the mailbox is another 3 foot, 3.5 foot. And this thing, it hit it at its waist. It was that much taller than that. So it had to be, 8 foot at least, maybe 9 foot, But that's it, and it looked just like the Boggy Creek photo on the cover of the film, where it's walking through the swamp and its arms are long and its fingers are long and it's bent over sideways. When I saw that, it shocked me how it took me right back to that second when we saw it coming. But we'll maybe go down there and see that pretty soon.
What do you think its intentions were? It
had bad intentions. It was a dark spirit, I took it as that was coming to intimidate us. The whole family was there, it was trying to show how strong it was. There are people that use bad medicine, that can manipulate other animals and stuff to do that as well. And that's what we believed it was.
Yeah.
So it turned and went away after she, talked to it in Cherokee and talking about God and kind of rebuking it, and it left. And as far as I know, never bothers the family again in that area. So it was.
Do you think somebody there was practicing bad medicine?
No, not my family. They were.
Do you think another family that knows you guys
yes,
sent it over?
Yep, there was people that were jealous of my family. We have one of the most beautiful spots on the creek here, for a mile or two, and we kind of got the choice land in this area during the allotments or whatever, and we had a strong family, and stuff. So this was people that were jealous, that knew medicine and wanted some of that, or wanted to, take us down. There was a lot of jealousy after the removal and stuff from Oklahoma, the Trail of Tears and stuff, and the people that had money and land and plantations in the east, moved first, and didn't have to go through those hardships and stuff. And the ones that come later, didn't, and a lot more died, and so it was really hard on them, and it took, we're still healing from that, as a tribe.
How did the Cherokee people end up here in Oklahoma? Can you tell me more about that?
Basically greed and money, the root of all evil. It's we were on the East Coast, and the Cherokees then, just like now, a lot of us, you couldn't tell they were Cherokee. They'd be really light complected and intermarried for 100 years, 200 years, but they had names and family land and allotments. When someone married into the tribe, they got their wife's families, took them in. They left their family and started providing for them. So there was a lot of difference in the look of the Cherokee. Even then, you couldn't tell us apart from the next person. We had representatives to Congress and stuff, and they signed the Indian Removal Act, in an effort to get our land. And not an effort, it was a done deal. once they done that for gold, they actually took the gold they found in Georgia and the Carolinas and bought the Louisiana Purchase with it. And then for some reason they closed they closed most of the mines, and the gold is still there. They just stopped mining all of it. And so a lot of the gold in Fort Knox, is probably come from there. So it was, the rest of the nation was kind of bought on blood money. But like I said, it's greed. It's the original evil. The evil one, we call him, that is behind it all.
So you guys traveled through like Tennessee, Kentucky, Missouri area?
Yep, land between the lakes. That's one of the travel routes out there in that area. They were put in stockades for more than a year in prison encampments, basically, and gathered up, like cattle and barely fed, and were in such poor health. The last of the Cherokee that come out before you started marching in the middle of winter, some with no shoes, no food, just meager rations, and then had to cross on any way they could on the big rivers and stuff, just to get little boats and stuff to go across. There was several that sank, and some of it was flooded. They had to walk through miles of marsh and stuff just to get to the rivers to cross them, in the middle of winter. It was amazing how they did survive, the ones that did. They're estimated, 5,000 people, is kind of a low estimate, they say, died of the Cherokee population. And then there was 5 other tribes in that area, the Choctaw, and several other small tribes you haven't even heard of that did the same thing. I forget how many altogether, maybe 20 tribes were forced to relocate to Oklahoma. So, yeah, the Seminoles were the only. They went into the swamps of Florida, and hid out good enough there. They kind of left them alone. But they were, they died. They didn't have an easy time. They starved out there in the swamps and stuff. There was so many trying to hide there, but they finally, the government couldn't get them out. Couldn't go in, and they were so far back in that they just left them. And so, but we have the Choctaw. We share common language, common words and stuff, and the Seminoles share with them. It's kind of just different locations, have just slightly different words and stuff. So they say we were all part of one tribe at one time, and the Cherokee is part of the Algonquin tribe, or the all up the East Coast, up in the Michigan and Canada. And it has the same Algonquin language. So.
Now, according to the native languages, did you come from the north, crossing the Bering Strait through Alaska, Canada, into what we know as the United States, or did you guys come from the south, like South America, like the Aztec Mayan culture? Can you tell me about that? What's the belief there?
There's a museum in Cherokee, North Carolina, that has some of the creation story. We were supposedly, our elders or our medicine men foresaw a coming of like a cataclysm on our island. We had come from another massive island that was going to be destroyed by fire, and it was. But before it happened, they saw it coming, so that we left on boats and came across the ocean and landed in South America, and come up through, and the Aztecs were there and stuff, and we were such a strong force, or equal size of tribes, that they didn't mess with us, and so we started moving. Our medicine men, and spiritualists, they directed us where to go, and said we can't stay here. This isn't our, how we lived or where we come from. The jungles and the heat and stuff like that. We come from a beautiful island nation, but we come up and started up into the Americas. Some say like a million strong at the time, traveling together and coming up through even Arizona and up north and then through the mountains, and so that until they found a place where it was kind of suitable, like we used to live, which is kind of North Carolina, is where most of us ended up there at the end. But left people all along the way, and And the other tribes that were already there, you know, we were outnumbered them so much that, you know, there wasn't any, you know, disputes or, you know, any warfare or anything. But a lot of the Aztecs came with us, you know, in that area, and they kind of settled around the coast, the Gulf area, and had temples and stuff, and that they're just now finding, you know, that have been destroyed or, you know, taken down. And supposedly they started doing their old practices again and sacrificing and, you know, new lives and stuff, and that wasn't the Cherokee way at all. So our people got together and decided to do away with them, and they did. That's why there's none, you know, no more in the Gulf Coast area and stuff. Even took as to take down their temples to the last stone, they said, is the story. But yeah, we're supposed to come from a island nation that we rode like sea turtles, like for like buffalo. You know, we hunted them and rode on them to fish off of and stuff. And so there's pictures of that and the story and stuff. It's a wild, crazy story that science will never tell. But it's passed down in oral tradition.
Yeah. So that would explain like the Cahokia Mounds, the Serpent Mound in Ohio, and different temples and mounds that they found throughout the United States. Are those from the Aztecs that came up here that did the bad medicine, or is that from the natives?
That's from natives before. They said those were here before, you know, us, you know, even. So, you know, other, you know, populations and stuff. I'm not sure on all that. I'm not real studied on that enough to say. You know, there's just other than what you can read off the internet. You know, you have to read 20 different stories or watch 20 different shows on one thing to kind of get your own understanding of stuff sometimes.
Yeah. The native elder that I saw on top of the Cahokia Mound, he said, "These were here before my people arrived." So they don't really know where it came from. It's pretty wild.
Yeah.
Probably came from a pre-flood era when it was still Pangea. Who knows?
Yep. Yeah. My Choctaw buddy, Wooden Clan Ken, he's got his channel, and he's got during one of the solstices, light beams dancing in a circle on top of one of the mounds there. It's one of the most, you know, eye-opening videos out there. But it's crazy to see that. But just kind of like our dances now, you know, the tribal dances. But these light beings were going around in the same way. It's like.
Can you tell me more about the dances and the ceremony on the hill? How does that work?
My sister could tell you a lot more about it. Okay. But they every week, or no, once a month, they dance and celebrate like green corn, and then which is a certain time of year for the harvest and stuff. But it's prayer. It's called a stomp dance, not a powwow that you see with all the feathers and all the tribes together and stuff. It's a more traditional dance of just, you know, back and forth, you know, and dancing to the rattle and to the song, you know, the voices, and to shells. They have turtle shells filled with, you know, rocks and you know, to make, you know, a rattling sound. They put on their legs and then dance to that beat. But all night and stuff, it's just prayer going up, and they do it in a spiral, a reverse spiral, so that all the bad, you know, in the world stays away from them. So everything else turns, you know, clockwise, and they all dance counterclockwise to, you know, to get rid themselves of the bad in the world. But it's prayer the whole time, and it's very moving. You know, you can feel it, you know, from the music, and it almost entrances you when you do it. It's not, you know, sacrilege. It's, you know, to some tribes, you know, to Christianity, you know, Christians and stuff, I guess it is, but they see it that way. But it was given to us by the Creator, and we were taught how to do that and shown that, and that's, I mean, it's not bad. It's not, you know, witchcraft. It's, people don't know, you know, just don't know. But,
yeah, they're judging what they don't understand.
Yeah. After the incident on the creek, we were about, I don't know, 8 or 9 years old then. At 15, me and my buddy, He moved down from Michigan with his family, and we've been like the Tonto and Lone Ranger ever since, you know, kindergarten. We run these creeks and hills and stuff, didn't matter, you know, day or night, you know, just like you've seen this week. Me and the grandkids, you know, they don't care to, you know, do anything, you know, aren't scared of it, you know. And we're going to crawl in a cave today, you know, just to, you know, see some weird structure in there, and maybe we'll get some of that film. But we were up on the hill just across from their farm, and had been up there, you know, several hours. It was right before deer season, I remember, like a week or two. We were just up looking around, so you know, the leaves were kind of thinning off, and we found a giant hornet's nest, a paper hornet's nest in a tree. And we just had a .22, and it was, you know, way up, like 40 feet in the air up there. So we started shooting a limb. You know, he's like, I'm gonna put it in my room, you know, I'm gonna have it for decoration. 'Cause they're pretty, the paper wasp nests. And we were shooting a limb, and we were almost out of shells. We only had like 2 or 3 shells. Now, at that time, there was, you know, there was danger of wild dogs in the area and stuff, you know, from this cattle farm. You know, sometimes they'd roam through there or whatever, but, you know, there was always a danger of something, you know. There wasn't many pigs around back then, but, you know, who knows, a coyote, a pack of stray dogs, you know, they're pretty mean too, you know. Like the lady that was attacked by, you know, possibly, you know, dogs on the farm here recently in Oklahoma, you know. So we left just a few shells, I remember, to walk home with. But his mom rang a church bell when it was time to come eat, or, you know, or do chores or whatever. You know, you can hear this bell for miles. You can hear it right now up at their house, you know, and we're, you know, a mile away from it. Wherever you were out in the woods, when she rang that bell, it was time to run. You know, drop what you're doing, fishing poles, guns, and, you know, she needed something, you know, to be done, or you need to be home to eat. So it's like, oh, it's like, we got to go. It's like, okay. So it was like, we're coming out of there. I was like, let's go down that ridge. You know, let's crawl up this hill and go down this ridge. I said, I've never been up there before, and it was about deer season, so we were kind of scouting or whatever. And he said, man, that ridge is so brushy. I said, I've been on there one time. And so there's just big boulders on the end of it. You got to kind of crawl down through them and, you know, go off to the creek down there. And I said, so I've never been on it, so I'm gonna go, you know, let's go. He's like, all right. So we go plowing up the hill, you know, pretty quick, you know, almost a run, a trot. And the leaves were, you know, like I said, pretty thick already, and it was just making a big loud crunching noise. Us, you know, hurrying too much. And this sound started that I describe as dogs talking Cherokee, or like a pack of dogs starting up, like just, and that last part of it, jiska, means to scare you in Cherokee. So it was like one was talking to another one, and then it did the roar, the T-Rex roar again, like we heard on the creek. It just the wail started up, and just the and did the, you know, lost sight perception again, you know, while that was happening, and just, you know, just vibrated you so hard. When it quit, I remember it again, it's like it releases you, and you just going. You know, they say don't run from Bigfoot, or, you know, or from a predator or whatever, but when something is that powerful and loud, you know, maybe 140 decibels right by you, you know, you're not going to stand there and say, oh, hey, how you doing? You know, it's primal fear to run. You know, it's ingrained in you. Either that, or you're going to fall and faint and die. You know, so we had the flight, you know, the fight or flight thing. We had the flight part of it down pat. We were beating feet down the hill, and at one point, I remember I was stopped. I was trying to run, and I was going through the brush, just running over trees and stuff, and I couldn't get through this area. And I was looking, and I was like, "What's got me?" You know, like I was thinking, "It's got me." You know, it's got me. I can't move. And I looked down, and it was greenbriers, not like the one with like 2 or 3 little thorns. It was kind of with a looks like 1,000 thorns in 2 inches. You know, just the fuzzy green thorns. And I just grabbed them with my bare hands and just snapped them. You know, a bundle of them about that big around, just snapped and just kept going. And I spent, you know, 30 minutes pulling them all out of my hands and, you know, cleaning up later. But I remember, you know, it's got me stopped. I can't go. I need to go. So bam, you know, didn't even think about it a half second. You know, I was moving again. And then about halfway down the hill, I said, "You've got the gun." He was in front of me just a couple steps, and I remember he just launched it over his head, and I caught it, you know, as we were, you know, moving through there. And he's like, you know, he don't want it. And I was like, when I got it, I realized this isn't going to do nothing to however big that thing is. You know, it's just a 22. You know, so we just kept it going, ran all the way home to his farm, and his dad was out in the yard. I remember. He's like, "What are you boys doing?" I said, "Man, you're all messed up. You're bloody, everything." He said, "We said first thing we said, did you hear that? Did you hear that?" Because this was so loud, it sounded like you could hear it for 5 miles. You know, it just, and he's like, "No, what'd you boys get into?" Or whatever. He's like, "Oh, that's just a bull up there," and you know that on their farm. You know, and his dad said, "No, Dad, it wasn't a bull. You know, it was." He said, "Oh, somebody was just trying to scare you up there," or whatever and stuff. It's like, he said, "No, nothing can be that loud. You know, without a loudspeakers and stuff. You know, I've been to concerts all my life, and you know, been right up next to the Metallica's, you know, boxes, stacks of speakers, and that feeling that hits you and stuff and vibrates you. That's kind of 10% of what this does to you." So it was another one of those out there, and I didn't know for years and years that it was a Bigfoot. Maybe, you know, there's other things out there besides Bigfoot, but I started listening to recordings. I thought surely by now on the internet somebody's got it recorded, you know, what we heard or whatever. So I listened to, you know, every weird sound, everything possible, Bigfoot howl, whatever I could find to try and hear it again. Finally I did, just about 3 years later. Jeff Harding had a guy fishing in Alaska that recorded it probably from a mile away or two while fishing in the boat. So it was kind of low, but it was that exact ramp up and that exact, you know, human sounding roar. But, you know, people call it the T-Rex roar or whatever. And we, you know, we had that, you know, circumstance of hearing it twice within 40 yards, you know. So Greg House, he's had it, you know, blasted right at his face too. And so as a younger boy, I spent a lot of time with my grandparents, you know, up the creek. And my great-grandpa, I call my grandparents because we call everybody our grandma or grandma. Your grandpa, it's just no matter how far, you know, they are or whatever. Even our aunts are considered our grandmas and grandpas and stuff. It's kind of, you know, Grandma Henny. She was actually my great aunt, you know, Henny. But it's kind of funny. Everybody's grandma or grandpa, you know, or Duda. You know, is the name for grandpa in Cherokee. Duda. So Duda man is what we called him. Not doo-doo, Duda. But we were in the yard one day, and he was talking to me in Cherokee, and I could understand it and speak it, you know, back then. And you know, he never spoke a word of English in his life. So, but I could, you know, hear him talking to me, you know, just like it's me and you right now talking. You understand every word he says, but it was all Cherokee. So I lost that after, you know, they passed, and you know, I got into school, you know, a lot more or whatever, you know, having to go to school every day. Well, I hung out there every day, and they fed me all the time and stuff. You know, my parents both worked and stuff, but you know, they were here a lot, you know, hunting fish with. But you know, we'd run the creeks, like I said, and just you know, go to a relative's house, all in this area. Every person will feed you. You know, you show up at their house, you know, we were getting fed. You know, so I was kind of a chubby boy back then. But we ran. We were out in the yard, and we were looking at the hill up there, and he couldn't see very far by that time. He was old. He seemed like he was 90 years old forever, you know. But he was a very smart man. He could read. He could read the newspaper. He would read it, but he never spoke a word of English. You know, and he built houses all his life, and you know, did everything. You know, the foundations, the plumbing, you know, everything just from being shown. You know, which is how everybody does, I guess. But he was a native. He knew a lot of medicine, a lot of the old ways. And one day we were out in the yard, and he said, "You see that bear up there on that hill? You know, Gwan? That's my name in Cherokee, is Gwan. I was named after another Indian medicine man, you know, in the family, you know, 3 generations back. And he said, "You see that bear on that hill, Gwan?" And I was like, "Grandpa, you can't see that far." He said, "You can't see the in the yard, you know, out there sometimes." But he kind of laughs, and he comes over to me and he puts his hand behind my head on there, you know. But keep in mind, I wasn't but, you know, 4 or 5 years old, and it was like I was looking through a tunnel, like a telescope, and it kind of just up to the hillside, and then it come on me like I was there, and there was a bear there, crawling up the hill, you know, digging through a log looking for grubs, a black bear, and I was like, "I can see him, I can see him," you know, Grandpa. And he took his hand from behind my head, and it all went back to normal, like a flash of light. Just kept, you know, and we were back there in the yard, you know, again. So I thought that was one of my first, you know, experiences of the, you know, unnatural world. You know,
what would you call that? Like remote viewing or hypertunnel vision?
I termed it distant viewing.
Distant viewing.
Viewing.
Yeah, I like that. Do you feel like the Sasquatch possibly have that same ability?
I believe they do. It said they do, and you know, that's how they can see you, you know, from miles away or know where you are. You know, like Arla Williams, you know, claims that they follow her and go with her. You know, and can teleport like, you know, like that. And our native, you know, beliefs is, you know, and some of our, when I was that age, our elders could still do that, some of them. You know, they'd see somebody in one town and offer them a ride back to their home or whatever, and then they would be there. You know, they'd refuse the ride or whatever, you know, or help, or taken somewhere to a gospel singing or something in another town. And when they got there in the car, they would already be there. And no one else picked them up or passed them or anything. But they didn't, you know, that boggles some people. But it was kind of a natural thing. We knew 2 or 3 people that could do that, you know, back then. And also disappearing. They had words, you know, spoke not really a prayer, but a series of words in Cherokee. And then some people say they had to touch a rock, had to bend down or you know, have a hold of the earth, and could disappear. Where, you know, somebody right next to you couldn't see you. And so that may be a, you know, a common thing shared with the Sasquatch, or they taught us or we taught them. But that's one of the beliefs that's out there.
Yeah, it's definitely an ability that they have. It seems like the Sasquatch can just disappear like an apparition, and they seem to be extremely fascinated with rocks. They're rock throwing, rock stacking, gifting people rocks.
The quartz rocks, the white rocks.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So there's definitely a connection with rocks and the Sasquatch, and I feel like they have these abilities, and the knowledge that you guys lost, they still retain that same knowledge, and they're able to utilize it out in the forest to benefit them when they're moving in and out of this world.
Yeah. Yeah. My sister was sharing the other night that maybe 5% of our population, our Cherokee population, out of 500,000, still do the you know, traditional stomp dances and carry the, you know, keep on the traditional ways and stuff. And out of that, maybe another 5–10% can speak fluent enough Cherokee. You know, it's mostly the younger generation, you know, starting it back up and keeping it alive. But we've lost most of our elders, you know, and the speakers of it. And once we've done that, our medicine has gotten weaker and weaker and weaker over the years and stuff. But I think the Sasquatch people still know that, and you know, and speak all that, and it's still strong in them. So I started as a, you know, watching the Finding Bigfoot shows with my grandson. He got into those and liked them. He started whooping or whatever. But we'd come to the creek here, and you know, be fishing or whatever, and we'd hear You know, people talk about the 800-pound owls or whatever. The owls can be loud, especially when they're right beside you. You know, and we experienced one the other night that made the weird one call, not a series of the calls like they do Who Cooks for You. It was just a wah, just a, you know, 3 times like that. I was waiting for the rest of it to play out, but it never did. And that's kind of unusual, but we just laughed it off. But you know, I started traveling around, or we heard a dove. I went to this story up on the hill here, which is about the top of it's about close to a mile away, up to the very top. That traveled through there, but it sounded like a very large person saying "hoo," you know, and just like a mourning dove, the coo of them, you know, up there. And as soon as he heard that, we were fishing. He just stopped. He said, "Listen, Papa, you know, that's Bigfoot," you know, up there. I was like, "Yeah, is that something, isn't it?" And it moved, you know, several, you know, 100 yards in just a few seconds. Or there were 3 of them up there, you know, talking back and forth to each other with that. But yeah, it was a very noticeable impression of a dove. Another time we were up hunting in the clearing where deer like to scrape and stuff. You know, it's kind of a natural opening or whatever. There's always a scrape in the area like that during deer season. And there was a stump there. There was a deer stand there, you know, that had fallen down, it was rotted down from a long time ago. But there was a stump there, and there were 3 rocks in it that were covered in orange mud. And he said, "Look, Papa, Bigfoot." And I come through there and I stopped, and I was like, "Where?" You know, he was a couple steps behind me, and I was like, "Oh no," you know. And he pointed to that stump, and I was like, "What?" And I went over there and we got to looking and pulled the rocks out and looked at them and pulled them. They were stacked in that stump down through there. And it was like, they were just perfect size for not a person to throw, but you know, something bigger than us to use as, you know, missiles, you know, you know, to chunk them, I guess, to get deer or whatever in that area. Is the way I took it right then. It kind of is like the perception of it, you know, hit me right then. And I was like, I know where these rocks come from. You know, there's a pond, you know, a half a mile down off the hillside there on the bottom that has that red clay. It's the only place around that's got that red clay on it. And whatever it was carried them, you know, from that and put them in that stump there. And I heard a story about a year later, that the Bigfoot used red water in a stump to make themselves invisible too. They rubbed it on themselves. And it's the natural part of that, you know, like touching the rock. They use that mineral or that red water in there to help them go invisible.
Didn't Kerry Arnold from Bigfoot Odyssey say, Kerry Arnold said when he encountered that Sasquatch when he was turkey hunting, it grabbed a tree and it shook it back and forth, mm-hmm. and it was angry. And I remember him saying that it had clay like smeared into it.
Yeah, like it had been belly crawling or something, and had that on there.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's interesting.
Yeah. And Greg House said he had one walking across a wagon trail or, you know, a road right away, and said it was coming through the brush the whole time. You could hear it, and it just kept coming. So, all right, I'm fixing to see it, you know. So I was drawing down, looking that way, and said it stopped and then continued making noise across the road on the other side. So you never saw it cross the road right there, you know, 40 yards. And he said you should have seen it, you know, broad daylight hunting. And he never did. And said it continued on through the brush on the other side. And so it's like, it's something like, you know, to do with that.
Oh, yeah.
But nobody knows for sure. I mean, you haven't seen them do it, you know, or whatever. You haven't seen them rub the clay on or, you know, speak the words or whatever, you know. It's everybody's experience is different, you know, and personal. Some people, you know, see all the bad ones, you know, some people see, you know, good ones. I hope to have a pleasant encounter one day. I started traveling to conferences, listening to other people's, you know, stories and stuff. That's what I'm interested in, you know, the personal stories of it that people tell at these places and stuff. Not all the big speakers that haven't ever seen a Bigfoot and, you know all about them or whatever. And I always meet one person that has, you know, and we bond. And I have friends, you know, all over, and you know, traveled to Tennessee a few times, and just everywhere, every walk of life that's to do with Bigfoot. I've met that person that I've watched, you know, on these films and stuff, and all these podcasts. I've got I put together a map of the land of the lakes, or the land of the lakes, the land between the lakes, last year, and just finished it, of everybody's sighting in that area, and they all signed it and marked the locations of, you know, where they've had their encounters. The Reed Noble Trackway, all the Bama's sightings, and Kumbos, and just, I mean, Denton's, and Moorhead. Everybody is on this map now, and that's something I hold, you know, hold special to my, you know, my person from, you know, from now on. It's like every one of these stories is on there, and the person who told it, I told them, don't just mark it, tell me your story, tell me what happened again, so I'll remember it, you know, and stuff. So that's everybody's like, that's a very special, very unique, you know, piece of paper there. On one of my trips, been two falls ago now, to Missouri, and I go out with anybody, or just go anywhere and, you know, talk to anybody about it. You know, I'll listen to them first and kind of get a feel of them, because, you know, in EMS, you know, I'm a paramedic, hence, and a fireman, hence the Pyro medic, you know, moniker. I you know, can get a sense from somebody real quick. It keeps me safe, you know, on the job. It's something that I've had to do, you know, all my life. I've been medicing since I was, you know, 17. So, and before that, we used to go in the community. My dad was a community health representative at the time, and he had a big tackle box, you know, full of stuff. And anytime we'd hear a car wreck or somebody was sick or whatever, in this area there was no ambulances, you know, for an hour from here. So we'd go out to their houses, or he'd go out, you know, take me along sometimes, you know, and I remember doing that, you know, as a young boy with him, opening his tackle box and seeing all this stuff and stethoscopes and stuff, and handing it to him, and it's kind of what got me hooked on it or whatever, and just being able to help, you know, our family members, you know, we knew everybody we went on pretty much in this area and stuff. So, but so yeah, we got to travel everywhere and just meet everybody and listen to their stories and stuff. And there's so many that, you know, I remember bits and pieces of, and it's like, oh, that's really cool. And a lot of people start showing me their pictures, you know, stuff you won't see on a podcast, and that's mind blowing. You know, it's like, wow, you know, that's some really neat stuff they have, and I have a few like that myself, and we swap them back and forth, you know, and they're like, you got to send me that, you know. It's like, but it's really interesting. Once you get into it a little bit, it kind of draws you in, you know, and kind of keeps you there. You know, when I started, and I was iffy about it, because, you know, a lot of people are told, you know, don't talk about them. It's gonna affect you. They're gonna come to you and, you know, see you or whatever. And I started putting trail cameras up and got some weird stuff that looked like little people to me on the trail cameras, and I was asking myself and kind of asking my ancestors, you know, my grandpa, you know, I talked to a little bit, and when I'm hunting or out, you know, alone, I remember following him, you know, when he was alive out there, and I talked to him a lot, you know, not just a little bit, ask his opinion, you know, or whatever, and, you know, like, give me a sign, you know, whatever. And I was like, should I pursue this, you know, should I, you know, do this, and, you know, is it going to bother me or my family or something, you know. But I got a response one morning. I was thinking that, I was just waking up in the morning, and there was a whistle in the hallway right behind me, and it was loud and clear, just like he used to whistle. He'd be waiting out in the woods and making sure I was hunting right out. You know, I'd sneak into an area and he'd already be there. And he's like, you know, find me. You know, don't let me, you know, get the drop on you, basically, whatever. That's how you got to hunt deer. You know, you got to be aware of your surroundings and do all that and stuff. So he'd whistle like that when he caught me. If he saw me for, you know, before I saw him, he'd do that and bust me. I was like, oh, you know. He was just standing a little ways over there, you know, behind a tree or whatever. And I didn't find him before, you know, he whistled at me. It's like, but that whistle was just like that. But I thought, oh no, you know, first thing I thought was somebody's, you know, in my house, somebody's broken in. So I jumped up, you know, with my pistol. I don't know how I got it so fast. I'm not paranoid. I don't carry, you know, sleep with a pistol under my head or nothing, but I remember it was close there. And I just jumped up and I was waiting for him to come around the corner. It was, you know, it was right there, and it was I guess a disembodied whistle or, you know, or something. I thought it was, you know, a person that, you know, had broken and entered, and I was just about to ventilate the wall. and I finally thought, no, let me look first. You know, it might be a relative or something. So I poked my head around the wall, and there's nothing there. And I was like, was that an answer to, you know, the spiritual part of it, you know? And, you know, in there, did they come to my house and do that? Say, hey, you know, we're here, you know. It's like, you don't really have to look for us, you know. So I slacked off after that. I took my trail cameras down. I was like, okay, you know, if you want to show me something, you can show me something. But, you know, been traveling around and meeting people and going places. Last fall, I was in Missouri with the group, and Richard Taylor from Texas was there. He's a Cherokee out of Texas. Fire investigator, insurance investigator. You know, very well, you know, respected in his field, and, you know, knowledgeable man. And we were sitting there around the fire, 3, 4 in the morning, and he said 10 o'clock. You know, he knew I knew times like that or whatever. And I looked at him and looked over, and up in the tree there behind the cedar bush or with it, there was some blue lights. And I looked and I thought, and I immediately looked for the moon. I spun around. I was like the moon's not up yet. You know, there's nothing shining, you know, reflecting off of that, you know, whatever. But it was a little bit dewy. But the lights lit up the tree around it for about 2 foot around it. But there was 2 balls of light. It was about 40 yards away that were a good foot wide or apart. I was like, what is that? And I was like, he's like, that's eyes. And I was like, no. You know, I was like, no, I just stood up right then. And it was like, you know, kind of like one of the hold my beer moments. I don't know if you want to add that in there, but, you know, I was like, I gotta see, you know, I gotta see it. I come all this way and I want to see what it is. I said, all these guys got, you know, weapons and got their state-of-the-art, you know, night vision and thermal cameras. I said, what does it look like through there? Because I just had a little cheap Seek camera, and I looked at it, and there wasn't nothing there. And they said, there's nothing there. We can't see anything. I said, stay here. I'm gonna flush it. So I'm gonna flank it and come up beside it, and whatever you film, you know, you'll be filming. You know, something's gonna happen. It's gonna get me, or, you know, I don't know. But I didn't have any fear at the moment. I was like, I gotta know, you know what that is. I didn't know if it was spook lights, you know, what it was. So I got up and went around out in the field like I was just walking off, you know, about 30 yards, and then turned and then come back to it, up to the tree. I was like, I lost him when it went off, and so I can't see it no more. So where'd it go? They said it just drifted back and then, you know, went off and disappeared right there when it saw me walking off and around it out there. So that was something I couldn't explain. I've never seen before in my life. You know, I haven't seen any orbs, but these weren't orbs. It was 2 blue glowing eyes that lit up around it. Couldn't see a form, you know, a head, make out shoulders or nothing, but it was just the eyes there glowing. So I had my thermal again, and I went up in the woods there, or the edge, and I found 2 layers of heat signature on the hillside. And I told them guys to bring your good camera up, you know, bring your good thermal up. And finally one of them did. They were like, said, "Are you sure?" I was like, "Yeah." I said, "I got something over here." And they come up there and got to looking through there. It's like right there, like 6 o'clock. And they looked through there and so we can't see it. So I just took off walking into it over there. It said it's going to jump up and run. It's going to have to take off, And so I get over there, and it's 2 layers of flat rock on the hillside laying there. Look like 2 Sasquatches. Your body's laying there hiding from us. So it was like, whoo, that was a funny moment because we were all on heightened alert after seeing that, and then seeing that heat source in the hillside. But it was just rock layers with leaves on them and stuff. I thought, we got them now. It's gonna jump and run. I was hoping it'd jump and run, but before that, we had a scream on the hillside that wasn't a panther. It was like a woman that got startled scream. It wasn't a mad, evil, scary scream. It was like just a ah in a woman's voice. With no one up there on the hillside. We'd been up there hours before looking at it, and you don't want to come off that hillside. It's so steep. So that kind of had us spooked a little bit, or not spooked, but aware, listening to the owls and everything. And then another Shane Carpenter was there, sitting across from the fire, or kind of beside me, and something come up the trail behind us, snuck up there, I guess, within probably 50 yards, and said, "Rah," R-A, like "Rah," just like that, but loud. And he balled up, and I got up and just took off walking the other side of the fire so I could face it, because I thought something was coming out of the trail on us, right then and there. And he was looking at me, kind of like that, and he said, "What'd you hear?" I said, "I heard rah." He said, "That's what I heard." So we kind of laughed about that a little bit, but we were still, that nervous laugh, like he's like, "Yep, that's it." Yeah, on the other one, when the thing screamed, there was a guy sitting there whittling, and all he did was stop whittling for just a second. And he looked up at me, and I said, "Did you hear that?" And he said, "Yep." And he just goes back to whittling. He's sitting there. It's like, oh, so we searched all around camp the next day, no tracks, no nothing. But that was, like I said, every experience is kind of a personal experience that some of you get to have out there. But that's something, granted we were on an expedition or a camp out or whatever, but that's 3 things happened that night, like the 3rd night of it that I've never seen or can explain myself.
So you've had several experiences on this creek. Have they ever came up to the campers or followed you to other areas?
The house I grew up in, is on the other side of the property here. When I was a boy, I had chicken pox really bad. I still got scars, from the chicken pox. I like to scratch them. I said, "Don't scratch," but it felt good when you scratch, So, but I remember, and I always chalk it up to having the fever with it. But later I think about it, I was at a time of weakness. People were attacking the family, with medicine, using bad medicine against us. And something, I woke up in the middle of the night, like, stars were out, the moon was out. You could see all the way across the yard to the top of the hill. And anytime we'd get hot in the summertime, we just, walk down the creek, and it doesn't matter what time it was, and, jump in. We didn't have air conditioner or anything. We slept with the screen doors, open, or the main door open, the screen doors closed. But I was thinking about going to the creek to, jump in, because, I had a fever. And I remember looking, and I couldn't see the yard, parts of the yard. I could see the edges when I was looking, and I looked closer, and I was like, what's the deal? So maybe my eyes are messed up, and I was looking again, and I couldn't see past this area. And I was like, I could see the sky above it a little bit, and then the edges of the yard. And I backed up like this, and there was something standing there within arm's length of outside the window there. And I got to following it, and I looked up, and it had the shoulders and the head up there. And our house was on 2 cinder blocks on that side of it, and then the window, and then, you know, up there, it had to be, you know, judging now, it had to be 9, 10 foot tall to block out the whole yard and the sky to that point. And I remember looking and looking at it, and I could see like big muscles, shoulders on it, and you couldn't make out hair. It was just a black area. It started turning, it was facing away from me, and it started turning so slow. It was like as fast as my hand's moving right now. I remember it just took forever and forever for it to move, and just standing and I just remember thinking, what is this? What is that? You know, why can't I see you past it? You know, and it just kept coming, kept coming, kept coming. And then finally I could see it had a face. And then once it got its nose and everything and its, you know, its facial features come, it turned and looked at me just that fast the rest of the way, and just boom, you know. But it, you know, it was right there. It, you know, could have reached out and touched it if the window was open, and that's all I remember. I remember wake up in the morning and you know, that was it. But I chalked it up to having the fever. There goes the mink right there, and there's that squirrel. That squirrel there. But, yeah, I've heard. I've got several friends or people on chats that have had the same experience as a kid, and you know, it scared them like that and stuff. But started bothering them when they were little kids, and I didn't really think that was a Sasquatch or something, you know, until I've heard their story over and over from different people of it doing the same thing like that. You know, I could think of, you know, 7, you know, just thinking right now have had the same experience. So that may have been one of my first experiences of them as well. They say they can make you go to sleep or make you not see them. You know, like I said, with the rocks, or you know, the going invisible and stuff. But I stopped at PJ and Paul's place on the way to the LBL this last year, and Mark Newell's been out there. Carrie was out there, and both had experiences and noise, you know, stuff, you know, caught on video. They have stuff like every night if they go out and listen. You know, it's there all the time. And they moved into an area like this where it's just, you know, secluded, and you know, there's not a house. There's a house, but I think nobody lives there a half mile away. But just in the middle of the, you know, dark, you know, the deepest hollow of Arkansas almost, or Missouri right there, Arkansas, I guess. You live just south of Missouri, and they just built a cabin. It wasn't quite done yet, but you know, you could sleep in it, and it's elevated off on the hillside, you know, with the walkway. You know, you can get under it pretty easy. I could walk under one side of it, but you know, they've been having experience since they moved there, and you know, she's got, you know, stories of them. You know, like I said, if she goes out there every night, she'd get something every night: a whoop, a knock, you know, a grunt, you know, a smell. But I experienced while I was out there. It wasn't a pig. It smelled like urine and strong, but it's like it comes to, when you're thinking about them or when you're in a certain area, it comes and gets close to you, you know, enough that you could smell it. So that got me, you know, crazy. So I went and looked for pig sign. There's no pig sign. There's no pig there. I'm like, wow, you know, there should be wallers and stuff, you know, whatever, but it's not pigs. And that night, went to sleep, woke up at 3:30 in the morning. I do that every morning, just wide awake, just boom, you know, like it's time to go do something. You know, and I always thought it was weird, and I always looked at my clock, you know, when I'd roll over, and I was like, yep, 3:30, you know, 3:30, usually be 3:30 on the dot. And after a while, I got to where I didn't even look at the clock. I knew what time it was, you know, when I did that. And it happened out there, and I heard rocks rolling around, like big, good-sized rocks. And on their hillside, they have it where the water won't run off, you know, the dirt and stuff through the yard. They have the big white cobble, you know, rocks in rows through there. And that's what it was. I could tell immediately that's what it was. It was rolling, picking up those rocks and setting them down. Some of them would be loud, some of them would be a you know, rolling around. But for a long time, I thought, I thought, they don't have livestock out here, tripping over these or pushing them around or, anything to be doing that. And I was like, I wonder what Paul's doing out there, this time of night, But it wasn't Paul. But it just kept doing it, kept getting closer to me, it kept getting louder. And finally I could hear it walk, and it was going to come under the front of that cabin there. And I thought, oh no. So I pulled up my knife to me and my other protection and was ready to, for it to come up the steps. And I got scared. It bothered me. So I started praying. And as soon as I was done, I call it a thunder knock up on the hill there behind her place where they hear them. It sounds like two boulders, this big, bigger than a watermelon, just getting smashed together and exploding, just and just echoing. It's not a gunshot. I've heard gunshots all my life, for miles and miles. You can tell the caliber of them, even, or pretty close to, what if it's a rifle or a 223 or, a shotgun, 50 cal, you can tell the difference in them. And this was two rocks, is all I can picture in my mind getting exploded, by being hit together. And all after that, all the sound stopped. Whatever was fixing to come up the steps stopped, and I fell asleep. End of story.
Yeah.
But it's like, oh no, I wish I'd stayed awake, had stayed awake a little bit longer, see what else happened. But it was like, did that prayer protect me? Did that, did that on the hill scare this thing off? Or did it just tell him to stop, to not bother him? Mm-hmm. Or, with it playing with the rocks that long, I don't think it was, going to bother me or hurt me. But it was curious about, with the rocks for some reason. But it was like digging through that whole pile of them, looking for stuff. And the next day we went out, and sure enough, they were moved and holes where they had been setting. I don't know if it was looking for grubs or what, but I think it was that prayer that kind of helped stop it. But it knocked me out. It wasn't an adrenaline dump where you just pass out or something. The next thing I remember after that power knock, it was waking up in the morning.
Yeah.
And hearing the morning birds. So
we talked about that yesterday, and I've had strange experiences where unknown creatures or beings will approach my tent, and I'm wide awake and super scared, and the next thing I know, I just pass out. And we kind of theorize that maybe these things have the ability to put us to sleep.
Yeah.
And it could be like a hunting mechanism or tactic, because I heard they can produce like infrasound and kind of like stun prey. I don't know.
Yeah.
What do we call it? A Squatch-induced coma?
Yeah. 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 I've heard several people say that. So I just went to sleep. Iron Dogger, she had one come across the river, on her, and the dog was freaking out, and she was in the tent, and it come right there to the tent in the camp with her, and she said, I went to sleep and woke up and the dog was asleep, in the morning. It's like, she's like, I can't explain that. So I had my gun out, ready to ventilate the tent, and this thing was,
Yeah, I've heard that too, where they're pounding on the house, jiggling the door handles, and multiple people have said it before, and they're like, and my two dogs, they were asleep. They never woke up. Because usually dogs will be going nuts when Sasquatch are around, but for them to be asleep and not hear things, because they're hypersensitive and they can pick up on things, even little tiny noises.
Yeah, yeah. I've had the vibrational, earphones and stuff that set, the bone mics and stuff, and the music, just the cheap ones now. You can get to play music. You can barely hear something when they're right next to you, but when you put them on, it's like a concert in your head. I mean, it's just, woo. I wonder if they can't tune in on that frequency, something similar to that, to vibrate that bone to talk to people and give them mind speak and to activate a chemical in your brain or whatever, like adrenaline or or melatonin or something dumb that just knocks you out.
Yeah.
Nobody knows.
Yeah, nobody knows.
That's just one of my theories. the Cherokee called themselves the people, or the first people. But then they called the Sasquatch, they had a name for them that meant the original people. So I don't know if we were modified with DNA from them to become human, or we were the, the original ones, as the creator, has made us, and it was his image. But I think they're very similar to us, have their own language. I've got a recording that people have shared with me that has at least 4 different tribal languages in it, of them talking to each other. That I've got the Spanish, the Mound Builders language, Cherokee, and Choctaw that we can find in it, and then some that we don't know what it is. That's like maybe ancient Cherokee. A person has told me, but I think there are people that have all these special abilities that we've lost over the years.
Do you think they'll play a role in the end times?
Other than the story I've been told, is that the Sasquatch people will come and dance around the fire with us in the end times again, before all is revealed and the Creator returns. But I don't know if it's like the Tower of Babel, where he separated all the tribes and all the nations, because we were getting too corrupt or whatever, and we lost, the ability to talk to each other, way back then. Maybe this was just another tribe that was separated, and we're not supposed to have interaction with anymore.